Welcome to Yell, Fight, Sooie, college football from three friendly-ish rivals.
It's a special Friday, everybody, because I am hosting Yell Fight Sooie, which, Andy, I don't think I've done in like a year. Boy, we're going to actually, you know what we're going to do, Andy? We're going to pause for a second because I've got a little Hank Williams for us to play today.
There's a tear in my beer, 'cause I'm crying for you, dear. You're on my lonely mind.
That's right. What a shitty weekend for us.
Yeah, I think all three of us did not. They could have not played last weekend, and it would have been a better weekend than having to watch what all three of us watched. I know we're going to talk about your game. I can tell you for my game that, like I was saying last week, I have no idea what team you're going to see or what thing we're going to do, but we have gotten into Chris Holt territory for you Astros fans who are listening to us, where we do just enough to lose. And boy, people say, hey, they looked good while they were losing, but we still effing lost. It was heartbreaking, but not unexpected. And I think anybody who is telling you they were horribly, horribly disappointed is selling you something, because they obviously haven't been watching this team for the last couple of years.
Okay, so dive more into that then, because as an outside looking in, I didn't see it as that bad a loss. But like you've said, you've been watching this team for years, a lot closer. What about it outside of Alabama's really good and better than maybe we thought, which is weird, and A&M just kind of came up short? What about it kind of screams more of the same to you?
You know, one of the things that you talk about in college football is it's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes. And a large portion that's true. But I think what we're seeing this year with A&M is that we're getting outcoached. And I'll give a huge caveat to that I think the outcome would have been different if Connor Wigman was healthy and playing football rather than Max Johnson on this past Saturday. But having said that, I don't know that our coaches have put us into the best position to win with the personnel that we have. And I'm talking specifically about the offensive coordinator, Bobby Petrino, and the defensive coordinator, DJ Durkin. Now, Petrino's a little bit handicapped because, as we were talking about last week, Max Johnson is not – he's a very competent college quarterback, but he's not what Connor Wegman has the potential to be. And I think Alabama exploited that a lot. He is a one-read quarterback. And if you cover that one read and you put any pressure on him at all, he panics. And you saw a lot of happy feet, a lot of, if you're an old Oilers fan, Warren Moon dancing in the pocket when he really didn't need to. And Alabama's very good. So, you know, you combine those things and it was kind of a worst case scenario for our offense. But I still think there are ways to beat that kind of pressure. And you make that one read a slant. You make that one read a short dump off instead of trying to wait for a play to develop downfield while your pocket's collapsing around your quarterback who doesn't feel pressure well. So that's on Petrino to me. From a defensive perspective, our goal very clearly was to go in and make sure that Alabama wasn't going to beat us with the run, and we were going to let their quarterback beat us passing. And he had 350 yards passing. So guess what? He did.
He did. Yeah.
And you've set up a blueprint for starting this week with Joe Milton in Tennessee, other teams to know how to attack the defense. If you can handle the pressure that A&M's front seven puts on the quarterback at all, and you're going to have trouble running. Any team we play is going to have trouble running against us this year. But it's kind of like last year when we were top 5 in pass defense. It's the opposite. You're top 5 in pass defense because you couldn't stop the run, so nobody bothered to pass.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely.
I think we're about to see where we've got a very good run defense, but that's going to be helped out a lot by teams just why bother to run the ball if we don't have to when they can't stop a 10-yard post down the field. So there's problems. A little bit of that's personnel because we have failed in recruiting cornerbacks for the last couple of years, and the transfer portal didn't help last year. But ultimately, the scheme's got to change for the talent we have. And I always think the best coaches are the ones that build schemes around the talent they have and not try to force their talent into their schemes. And I think we're kind of at that crossroads. And I just, like a lot of A&M faithful right now, I just don't know that Jimbo's going to be able to pull out of this.
Okay, so let's take a look at the rest of the schedule, because I know you had said, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had said if you were running the show, 8-4 does not keep Jimbo's job.
Right. And this also supposes that I have,
Any
tens,
influence on that at all? Right.
tens of millions of dollars to make that decision.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so we have Tennessee this week, and then we have a bye. And then you get
6 games left, 3 of which are against ranked teams as of this minute, right? You have Tennessee,
and I'm not worried so much about the ranking. I'm worried about the style of football that those teams play, right? So I really do think Tennessee's beatable. I'm going to regret saying that when we have this conversation next Friday. I'm almost positive, but I think they're beatable. I think Joe Milton throws a lot downfield. He's not incredibly accurate. That probably will help. But they're beatable. It is a tough game. You go to Rocky Top and have to play in Knoxville. That's going to be a tough trip for A&M. And Jimbo has a 7-game losing streak in road games, which is a whole other thing. Then you've got a bye. Then you've got South Carolina. As much as we love Spencer Rattler on this show, and yeah, I did it again. I think that's a winnable game for A&M. It's at A&M. Our pressure, the way we pressure the quarterback, should fit into beating that team. But then you've got Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is going to tear us apart from a passing perspective unless you can get extreme quarterback on Jackson, or extreme pressure on Jackson Dart. Mississippi State at home is beatable. Abilene Christian, of course, is going to be beatable. That's funny I said it that way. And then you've got LSU in Baton Rouge the day after Thanksgiving, or the Saturday after Thanksgiving, which is another team that's going to throw down the field and pick apart our defense.
But they don't play defense either. So
I mean, if I'm guessing, you lose to Ole Miss, you lose to LSU, you could win the rest. I think Tennessee's a toss-up. So 3 more wins gives us 7. So you're 7-4, and then Tennessee's the toss-up between 8-4 and 7-5. And 7-5, I think Jimbo's definitely shown the door. 8-4, I think there's a big if on that. So this Saturday, unfortunately, is really pivotal to a bunch of things. I think it's pivotal to Jimbo's future, whether it's next year or the year after. I think it's pivotal to holding on to this recruiting class that's currently number 3 in the country. I think it's pivotal to keeping the clubhouse together. And I know that's a baseball term, but keeping the locker room together is important, because you've got a lot of guys who will have a lot of options at the end of the year with the transfer portal.
Well, but to your point too, like, let's say you lose against Tennessee, to your point about losing the locker room, all those other the South Carolina and Mississippi State game all of a sudden become toss-ups themselves, because you don't know if Jimbo has enough cred to rally to save his job, sort of mojo going on.
And I don't pretend to know what the player's headspace is and how, an entire locker room
diagnosed from watching a game 600 feet away.
Yeah, well, I don't pretend to know how 105 guys in a locker room feel on any given moment, because they're not a monolith, right? 105 guys might feel 105 different ways. I was encouraged in a weird way that Walter Nolan, who's a sophomore D tackle, who was the number 1 recruit in the country in that 22 class, was crying on the field after losing to Alabama. And I was encouraged, not because I like seeing grown men cry, but I mean, I do, but it's a whole different podcast. But that he cared enough to be that emotional about it. I think you need that. I think you need more players who are bought into that. And I don't know that there weren't more, but I'm encouraged a guy who is that high profile, who in this new world of college football will have other teams bidding for his services at the end of this year, cares enough about that loss that it bothered him. I hope there's more of that, and I hope you see it starting Saturday, that there's a little bit more pride and enough of that want to for A&M to overcome what I think is just some bad coaching at this point.
Right. Well, I just, I think it's a fascinating thing to watch, because I think I think the shaking up of college football and the wild, wild west nature of it all might be, and not just for A&M, but I think other schools might be speeding up the processes of coaching changes as looking for any type of positive momentum heading into sort of a more unknown landscape, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the problems that college football has. I'm not a fan of the unlimited transfers. I'm not a fan of the free transfers. I do understand players shouldn't be tied to a program, but I like sitting out 1 year because it has to have some hurt for that player.
Yeah.
Unless the coach changes. If the coach leaves, all bets are off. I think that everything should be wide open.
Yeah.
But the way it's set up now, if we decide to part ways with Jimbo Fisher, that is going to be an end of the year decision. That will be after or during the LSU week. Right? So if that happens, your first signing day is 3 or 4 weeks after that. So you're asking A&M at that point to hire a new coach, get a full staff, hold on to a recruiting class, and fill any holes that you have, and that's virtually impossible. So you're setting up a new coach basically for failure. And we saw it when Jimbo came in. It was a little bit different timeline, but you saw it with Sark too. It's a lot of just holding on, trying to get guys to at least not commit in December to your rival school. And seeing if they'll hold on till February. That's a victory. And unfortunately, that doesn't usually result in them signing with you. That just means you got them to wait 2 months. It's tough. And I mean, if you're really ready to let go, I think college programs, you're going to see more and more of October firings. So you give yourself you give yourself a chance to find a quality head coach.
Yeah, I think it's one of the slippery slopes that you and Scott have brought up a bunch of times on the show of the unintended consequences of all of this. Besides the idea that we are, I think, as an educator, continuing down this path of appeasing the wants and needs of children who don't really have an idea of how to really think through process. That's why I think the idea of bringing back the sitting out a year is something that makes sense to me as well. Yeah, I think the whole thing is interesting. I think A&M is very, very much a linchpin in all of this situation, because if they do run the table, well, then there is no issue. And you roll into the SEC with all the momentum of the world as the SEC gets ready to triple in size next year.
And I mean, and it's frustrating, but 10-2 is still on the schedule in front of us. That is still a thing that we could do. And I guess that's what hurt more about the loss to Alabama, is that we were leading at halftime. We missed opportunities in the first half to be up at halftime, and then just kind of ran out of gas, and Alabama made the adjustments they needed to make at halftime. But you're so close. You lose by a touchdown. That's a close game. And I don't care that their quarterback threw for 305 million yards, but we were in this game with a chance to win it in the fourth quarter and just didn't. And that's tougher to swallow almost than getting blown out.
I do think that's true. I think
and so it just gets to be a point of, do you learn from this and get better, or do you continue to do the same crap you're doing over and over and over in these type of games? And that's what I think most A&M fans don't know. If you talk to most of us, besides the college kids who believe their team's going to win every week, I don't think anybody knows who's showing up in Knoxville at 2:30 tomorrow on CBS.
Yeah.
I know I'll be muting Gary Danielson, though, because I do every week.
Because you do every week. Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't see the season coming. I think I was higher on A&M than you and Scott were at the beginning of our show of the season. Obviously, we can check the tape if you choose, but I didn't see some of this coming, and so I think it's interesting from an outsider's perspective as to, because I do think the buyout of Jimbo Fisher is now manageable, right? Like for our schools, it's manageable. I know it's probably not manageable for Baylor or somebody, but
there would be pain with it, but it's not something that. Let's put it this way: if we were motivated to pay that buyout, we would pay the buyout. There is money available. Now, it would hurt other things, but it wouldn't affect who we hire for the next coach. It wouldn't
Sure.
be a Baylor situation, since you brought them up, of we're firing this coach, we're paying this huge buyout, so that's going to have to discount who we hire next. And that's how you get into this cycle of coaches that maybe aren't qualified. I also don't think the next guy is going to get $10 million unless we go for an Urban Meyer type, which we're not doing. Sorry, A&M fans. That's not a.
Is there anybody on the radar that you could see as being, and because that is part of it, right? You have to find a guy that's better than Jim.
Most A&M fans will tell you Mike Elko right now, who is the head coach at Duke, who has done very good things with that program over the last 2 years. But we have this wonderful thing, and I don't know if you're a fan. I'm actually curious as to whether or not the Texas fan base has it. Any coach who has ever coached at Texas A&M, there is always a segment of that fan base who wants them back in some capacity after they've left. There are still people calling for Mike Sherman to come just be a OL coach because he coached here once and he was good at finding offensive linemen, so we should hire him. He's 106 years old and he can't stay awake now, even when he's not sitting in a draft combine. But we do this constantly. If you used to play linebacker, oh, well, of course you should be the linebacker coach. It's such a high school mentality about what is a multi-billion-dollar business. It just kind of drives me crazy. I wouldn't be able to answer intelligently about who you should look at as the next A&M coach. I do think Mike Elko would get a look because he does have familiarity with the program and he's a very good recruiter. But that's what you're looking at. You've got to have somebody who has SEC familiarity, because that's going to matter. You've got to have somebody who has Texas connections, and you've got to have somebody who recruits at a really, really, really high level. Because that's one of the things that's been frustrating for A&M fans, is that Jimbo and even Kevin Sumlin ahead of him recruited well. But when you're in the top 10 in recruiting, and you can see this now, the 9 guys ahead of you are all in your division. So if you're A&M and you are number 8, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, LSU are all ahead of you. So you're already 5th in your conference.
Yeah, it's a good point. And then if you also have an issue developing that talent, which has been our issue here, all these great recruiting classes are fine. If you don't actually turn them into good football players, it doesn't necessarily, or turn them into great football players, I guess, it doesn't necessarily matter.
I mean, that's a good segue. So what happened at the Red River rivalry last weekend, Jim?
Well, that's what happened. No, it was obviously frustrating. There was a lot of bad, a lot of good, a lot of looking through the shit to find the nuggets of corn that are worth finding, I guess. Obviously the first quarter was just one of the weirdest first quarters of football I've ever seen, with turnovers and blocked punts and this and that. And it was kind of nuts. Quinn Ewers threw one of the worst passes I've ever seen anybody in Division I throw ever, where he threw into triple coverage. And the only reason why the ball was almost not intercepted is because somebody else almost intercepted it first. It was very, if he played like a kid who had never played in that game before, which is weird because he did play in that game before.
Right.
A couple of things though that impressed me. I thought Texas ended up actually playing a very good football game for 3 quarters. I was shocked at, I've seen a lot of, obviously up tempo is a part of what we see in football now. I don't know that I've ever seen a team go as up tempo as quickly as Oklahoma was going. I mean, it literally was, I was getting exhausted watching it. And that's just a kudos to them for being able to execute at that pace, because they really were just sprinting to the line and calling the next play as soon as the ball was set. It was pretty impressive.
Well, and not to make it about me again, but that's kind of what I'm talking about when you have a talent mismatch. Texas up and down the roster has more talent than OU does right now. That hasn't always been the case over the last decade, but it is the case now. But Venables and his offensive coordinator were able to find a vulnerability and take advantage of that. And the vulnerability is basically getting you guys into a particular defensive set and then going fast enough that you couldn't substitute for situations. That means their guys have to be in shape and be able to run that many plays in a row without substituting. And that means they were able to identify what that weakness was and take advantage of it. I think Gabriel played a great game. I think the difference in the game for you guys was, whether it was yours or the offense or whatever, just the shakiness for the first 10 minutes of the first quarter. Because that first 10 minutes of the first quarter, like you said, was kind of a shit show, with everything that could go wrong went wrong. And you still came out of it not trailing by, a dramatic amount of points. You end up taking the lead, only to, for it to be a last possession kind of game.
Yeah, and I was going to get to that too. That frustrated me. And we've all seen this, the old Bill Parcells adage about the only thing the prevent defense does is to prevent you from winning.
Yep.
It seemed weird to go into a prevent with that much time left on the clock. I know it was just under 2 minutes, but that's still a lot of time in college football. But it also felt like anytime Texas put pressure on the quarterback through scheme, they were pretty effective on defense. Anytime that they only rushed 3 and sat back, they got picked apart. And so why they chose that to be the strategy for the last 2 minutes, I don't understand. I will tell you that the minute the kick went through and then OU got the first down on that drive, both Jessica and I knew the game was over. It wasn't a defeatist kind of thing. It was just having watched that 3.5-hour football game, knowing that it was over. There are some stretches that I'll take to be positive about it. One of which being, it's very hard to beat a football team twice in 1 year. We've seen this over and over and over again. In fact, Texas won the OU, the Red River shootout. It's not going to be the rivalry or the whatever it is, shootout. Calm down, people.
You guys have so many rivals.
We do. We had it a couple years ago. We won it a couple years ago and then lost the championship game in Dallas. So I think these two teams will meet again. I think Texas is the better football team, and I think Texas in that championship game will end up winning it and still go to the college football playoff.
Yeah, I think it will be a big test for Sark again, because his history hasn't been that he necessarily learns the lessons that he needs to learn. And I think that has changed. I saw that change a little bit last year for him, where he started realizing towards the end of last year that, well, I really want to pass the ball, but I really do have Bijan Robinson standing on the field, and I have Roschon Johnson with him. I could run the ball and win games. And you started to see that in the last third of the season last year. And I know you were frustrated at some points during the year why aren't we running the ball when we have an all-world backfield? Because we're trying to make Xavier Worthy something. We're trying to make the offense look attractive. Whatever the reasons were, it seemed like he was stubbornly working through his script rather than seeing what he could do to win games. This year, from what I've watched from Texas football, it has been a lot more of, we're going to impose our will, but we're going to impose our will based on the talent we have.
For the most part, yes. There's been moments of that where I remember a game a couple weeks ago, they ran it 8 straight times. And it's like, okay, you've established the run, and then to me that the Texas offense this year is so much more talented and balanced that balance should be the rule of the day. And I do think for the most part you're seeing that. I do think that Xavier Worthy isn't getting the catches, but he's much more effective because there are other people that can catch the ball and move the ball, and so he's able to work deep into the secondary. So I feel like Sark, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think with having the bye week after OU, which is kind of weird, doesn't usually work that way. It will be interesting to see how he comes out next week. And as you and Scott both pointed out last week, the rest of the opposition for Texas until the Big 12 championship game isn't super impressive. And so it will be interesting to see what this team does over the next, 5 or 6 weeks before the game in December happens.
Yeah, I'm looking at the rest of your schedule. You have Houston after the bye, and the BYU at home, Kansas State at home. You go to Fort Worth in that tiny stadium that they're very proud of to play TCU. On the road at Iowa State, and then back home for Thanksgiving week with Tech. For how many rivalry games is that? 6?
17. I think.
But if I'm looking at that schedule, U of H's miracle win last night notwithstanding, and I am guilty of, I watched that game up until West Virginia took the lead with 12 seconds left and go, well, U of H just U of H'd again. And then randomly in my Twitter feed, somehow that came across, and I don't know what the algorithm was thinking. I just Houston, and that was enough to get it on there. But there's very little chance you're going to lose in TDECU Stadium in 2 weeks. BYU can be challenging, but I think you out-talent them. The only thing I'd circle on this calendar is kind of I don't know, is Kansas State, and that's at home. Kansas State has had some mojo with you guys.
No, I mean, really and truly. I think that purple and silver kind of causes everybody to curl into the fetal position and suck their thumb around here. But yeah, there is some uncertainty, and the whole thing is kind of weird, because there's already talk that Quinn's going into the draft the next year. And I guess that could happen. It seems like that seems weird to me after only been a starter for 2 years, but maybe I don't necessarily see an NFL ready quarterback. So it's interesting just to kind of look. You can't help but look ahead to next year and the SEC, and you think to yourself, well, if we've got a third-year Quinn Ewers, are we better to begin competing in the SEC than a first-year Arch Manning? And that seems to be the binary choice. And so the whole season, much like you guys, really is going to be an interesting foretelling as to what the SEC can be like. Because if Texas does win the Big 12 and go to the college football championship, then Ewers is going to enter the draft, which means Texas is going to enter the SEC with an experienced offense everywhere but at quarterback.
Hey, and you have the other guy from California, Malik Murphy, who, to go back to your point with Quinn, the scuttlebutt when he transferred from OSU back to Texas, because he was committed to Texas originally, was that he was going to play 2 years and go to the NFL draft. And if he wasn't in the NFL draft for 2024, something had gone wrong, like an injury or something like that. So I don't know how much of those rumors are some of that lingering, or if his camp really does believe that I was only going to be here 2 years and I've already made that decision that I'm leaving regardless of what happens on the field. And unfortunately, there are players like that, and there are players who have handlers that feed into that. I think clearly it would be better for your program if he stayed for another year, and I think it'd be better for him if he stayed for another year. Because like I said, you've pointed out too, he's got to show that he doesn't start off slow in every game before the NFL is going to be super interested in him, because he has other holes in his game. And it's, you're drafting him and you're already going to be down, the beginning of every game because he has first quarter jitters a lot of the weeks. That's tough. And, I think it would behoove everybody if he stayed. Having said that, he might not. Arch Manning, regardless of his last name, is an unknown quantity in college football. He should be good. He might not be. Quarterback is kind of a crapshoot sometimes. Malik Murphy, from everything I heard from a camp perspective, kind of outplayed Arch Manning in training camp, but he also had more reps than Arch Manning got. So I don't know, where the truth of that lies. But yeah, clearly it would be better for your program going into the SEC next year if you have a third-year quarterback rather than a first-year quarterback. That's just common sense, I think.
And I suspect that Quinn Ewers' decision is going to be made really at the end of the year when they're able to give him those draft projections and stuff like that. Because not that Mel Kiper matters, but I guess he's Mel Kiper's fourth quarterback.
Yeah.
But we all know that the fourth quarterback could easily slip to the second round. There's always going to be guys that come out of nowhere that get drafted ahead. It's also going to matter what the rest of the class looks like this year versus next year. So until he declares for the draft, I'm not sure I'm counting on it. I'm interested in Malik Murphy because he's a different type of quarterback. He's more of a dual threat kind of guy. And here at Texas, we've had some success with those. And so I'm kind of curious as to see what that would look like if he actually does get a year to start, maybe between Quinn and between Arch Manning.
We do have a third leg of this show. We have not mentioned Scott was unavailable to record this morning, and we
Playing
wish
golf
him-
again.
I was going to assume he was sick. I didn't want people to know he was just blowing this off, but that's fine. If he's playing golf, good. We should mention that Arkansas did lose to fall to 2-4 against Ole Miss. I did watch some of that game. I was impressed with their quarterback Jefferson. He played a much better game than you would expect, but as we've kind of pointed out on the show, Ole Miss doesn't play defense. But Jefferson looked night and day better as a quarterback and as a team leader than he did against A&M a week earlier. A&M tries to play defense for the most part. So it's kind of, back to the mystery of my schedule. I have no idea what Ole Miss team we're playing or if it matters if you get to Jackson Dart. Sometimes it does, apparently. But I think they played well, even though they had the loss. But they have Alabama this week at 11 o'clock in the morning in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
I don't really see any way Arkansas stays in this game for a really long time based on what I've seen the last 2 weeks of football.
Yeah, I don't either. And it does seem like, obviously they have Florida International, so that will be a win, but I don't necessarily, even though the rest of their schedule isn't world beaters, I don't see bowl eligibility in Scott's future.
Yeah, and from talking to Scott, I don't think he does either, which is probably part of his general malaise these days. But it's interesting because that entire organization loves their head coach, but if they're 3-8, or what would that be? 11, 3-9, 4-8, does he keep his job? You went completely mute.
Sorry, I went completely mute because we're having apparently the football teams playing in Brownsville this weekend. If in case anybody, a programming note, if you're interested in watching some pretty meh TAPS 3A football, head down to Brownsville.
Going down to Brownsville.
Go St. Mike's. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's any way he keeps his job. I honestly don't. And Arkansas is a weird program. It's going to be it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see. We've talked about what happens to Oklahoma when they join the SEC and what we think will happen, and whatever. But it's becoming increasingly clear that the SEC that Texas and Oklahoma joining aren't really an SEC that y'all like. It's about to become a whole different thing. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens to Arkansas's program as well, because I think Arkansas will take a bigger hit from recruiting than A&M will by Oklahoma and Texas joining the conference.
Well, that's the thing. A&M has never stopped recruiting against
Right.
Texas and Oklahoma. That it's just regionally, it's never been a thing where we got to stop. We did have an advantage for a decade of saying, hey, come play in the SEC. It's better for you. And that works with a lot of players. We'll lose that part of it. But as much as critical as I am of Jimbo Fisher and his ability on the field, he is a very, very good recruiter.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's hyperbole to say he's an elite recruiter. They're coming off a 5-7 season, and he's got the number 3 class in the country with fewer recruits than 1 and 2 right now, if I remember right. So we have 22 guys, and now the NCAA says we can take 85 every year. So the problem is he doesn't get to just be director of recruiting for $10 million a year. But yeah, Arkansas's, you almost want to have somebody like the coach at and I've lost his name, UT San Antonio, a guy who is used to doing more with less. God, it's going to bug me that I don't remember his name right now. I could look it up.
Oh God, I don't even remember. I'm looking it up now because he used to be head recruiting coordinator at Texas.
Yeah, but he's a guy that has strong Texas ties, and I think if you're the head coach of Arkansas, you still need that because of proximity.
Jeff Traylor.
Yeah. So Coach Traylor, if you're in Arkansas and you're Coach Traylor and you can effectively recruit Dallas, which is what Arkansas used to be able to do when they were consistently good, that would be a big win for them. I understand the hire for Pittman. I understand why they love Pittman. I understand there's going to be a lot of regret if Pittman doesn't work out this year, which it looks like he's not. But I think something has to change, and I think that's a program that is going to be looking for a younger, hungrier coach
Yeah.
than maybe they've hired in the past, with somebody less insane than Chad Morris.
Yeah, and I think I think bringing up Jeff Traylor makes a lot of sense.
There are A&M fans who would take Jeff Traylor right now.
There were Texas fans who would take Traylor. Like I think, and I almost wonder if, when Texas went after the hot young commodity in Herman, A&M went after the hot established name in Jimbo Fisher. I almost wonder if the way to do it is to go and find somebody like a Jeff Traylor who's young and hungry and wants to make a name for themselves, or even a reclamation project like Sark. Like, as you know, I've been on board for the Sark thing because I've always felt like when you're down at halftime and you've got a recovering alcoholic who's hit rock bottom, who better than anybody else to say, I know what it's like to get out of this, I've faced tough things before. I almost wonder, though, is how often does it really work outside of Nick Saban and Urban Meyer from established guy to go from one program to another program to another program and keep that same level of success going?
I mean, there's a handful, and they're considered amongst the best coaches to ever play. A lot of A&M fans regret is that we probably could have had Urban Meyer after we shit canned Dennis Franchione, because he was at Utah. He was there for the taking. There were people who were interested. Instead, we did a nationwide search to hire Mike Sherman.
Like the nationwide shirt.
The nation of the Gulf Coast of Texas, because he was sitting in Houston at that point.
It's like hiring Dick Cheney to decide who's going to be the vice president. Hey, it's me.
I mean, that should have been a first clue that wasn't going to be a great hire when Sherman says, hey, I want to take this job. There's only a couple places I'd leave the NFL for, and this is one of them. But I need to finish out the Texans season.
Yeah.
Let's see. We mentioned Arkansas is playing Alabama this week. We both think that Alabama is going to win fairly handily. The other game, because Texas is playing BYE before they play BYU.
We're going to beat off this weekend.
Yeah, we have to give that. It wouldn't be this show if we didn't mention that joke.
I think it's the last time we get to use it, though, right?
Yeah, I think Arkansas.
Well, I guess when bowl season happens, we're all going to be beat off.
We'll have that.
Yeah.
A&M is in Knoxville, as I mentioned. Tennessee is obviously a favorite at home. The battle is really going to be Joe Milton against our defense. I don't know. Tennessee's not as good as they were billed at the beginning of the year. They're still a ranked team. They are still at home. They still do things that we don't defend well. And I don't know that Max Johnson is ever going to get off his first read, which unfortunately is his brother right now. And nothing against his brother. Jake Johnson is a great tight end, but your first read can't be your tight end.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Not if you're a vertical passing team. Your first read can't be that should be your last read. So I don't expect good things I don't expect to be talking about good things from that game next week. I'm hoping they surprise me like I do every week, but I'm ready to put up more Halloween decorations around 4:00 on Saturday. The front should be in Houston by then. Should be nice weather for the weekend. That's literally where I am in life. I don't look forward to football on Saturdays anymore. I look forward to the weather changing.
The weather changing. Well, I guess that's as good a way to end it as always. This is Yell Fight Sooie. We're going to be back next Friday where we'll have Andy and Scott, but probably no me, because I'll be preparing to walk my daughter down the aisle, and I don't know that I'm going to have we've rented a house for everyone. I don't know that there's going to be space for me to sit around and talk about whether Texas will win. So
can't we just have Jordan on the show instead of you?
Well, you know what, I bet you by that time we get there, she'd much rather do this show than deal with some of the trappings that come with getting married. So maybe Jordan and Braxton will sit in on Yell Fight.
I would take Braxton on the show if you can make that happen.
We will work. I'm going to effort to get Braxton to sit in with me on Yell Fight Sooie. We will be back next week for Andy Tom Cheston and your Fighting Texas Aggies. I'm James Christopher. Scott is on the links. We think this has been Yell Fight Sooie.